Home technology can be hacked. Anything from a coffee machine or LED light to a TV or a doorbell. We understand the risk of being vulnerable on our tablets and phones, but you'd be shocked to realize how much data is collected from our other smart devices and how those very same devices can lead to a much wider compromise. Many of us don't even know how many devices are on our connected networks, so we better listen up. Today's guest is Amanda Fennell. Amanda is the Chief Security Officer and Chief Information Officer at Relativity. In her role, she is responsible for championing and directing their tech and security strategy, including risk management and compliance practices. She has a master's degree in forensic science and over 15 years of experience in forensics and cybersecurity. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. Amanda, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited as well. Can you give myself and the audience a little background of who you are and what you do and why?
Ooh, okay. I mean, the why is the easiest answer. Who I am is so existential. So I'm Amanda, and I'm Chief Security Officer and Chief Information Officer at Relativity. We are a legal tech and compliance company based out of Chicago who, honestly, I feel like not many people have heard of us unless you do like e-discovery and things like that. And you've been around like Encase or something, but the easiest way to say it's kind of like a Splunk for legal documents. You know, we organize a bunch of legal stuff. And now we've gone into the compliance realm. So we organize a bunch of stuff so you can figure out what to do with it.
Nice. And so why did you get into this field?
You know, I got into the field of security, I think, because just naturally, archaeologists, right? That's what we do. We're nosy, right? So it's the same thing. And I started my master's and actually had gone right into trying to do paleo-hominid biology. And they were like, there's no full-time jobs here for that, right? And I was like, oh man, well, where can I do forensics but have job security and pay my student loans back? And at George Washington, they were like, there's a digital forensics program. I was like, game on. I am going through that. So The Matrix had just come out and I was really fascinated by that. And I was like, I'd love to know how to deal with computers. That looks really cool. And that was it. It became the love affair of my life.
Awesome. So let's talk about smart home security, because I doubt that there's anybody listening to this podcast that doesn't have at least 45 smart devices in their house.
That's true. Depending upon how many children are in there too. That's really bad.
Exponentially increasing numbers.
Yes.
So I think let's talk through some of the risks of smart devices, and then let's talk about like what the heck we can do to mitigate that risk. Because I don't think you can. We can talk about ways to eliminate the risk, but I think you and I are going to have the same answer: is throw it out, unplug it,
unplug it. Yeah,
and that's the only way to eliminate the risk. So let's talk about what kind of devices have what type of risk, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I think the first thing is, let me set the stage that I'm not the perfect either. We're on this precipice that we just admitted and we got to it where we got some of the home pods for Siri, like in the house, because I just love music. And so we just got to this point years and years after, because everyone assumes that I would have all of the latest and greatest technology everywhere. And while that could be true, the reality is you also have a huge avoidance to it because you also know it could be exploited. And so we just got to this point where I also have started to have to delve really deep into this, which is why this was such an opportune time to talk about this, because I've been having to do so much research on it. So I guess the first thing is, let's talk about the why this attack would happen and what they're doing. It's the easiest thing to target, right? The sheer scale and target. So surface attack reduction, right? There's just so many different targets out there. Every house does have a multitude of IoT devices that people may not even realize that's what they're doing. So you may or may not have a fridge that does this, your Peloton, baby cameras, external storage devices. These things are just all across the place that everyone can get to them. Your TV, if you've bought a TV in the most recent couple years, I guarantee you there's a way for to hack through it. So I think the first problem people face is that the sheer multitude, they're all over the place. They're in your house, whether you recognize it or not, your coffee machine, whatever. So these things are there. And I guess the part that's hard for people is that everyone walks around with that persona, like almost like nobody would hack me. What does anybody want my information for? I don't have that much money in my bank account. You're welcome to it. Those kind of dialogues. And the reality is they're not like you don't have a, team of 50 hackers in a room in Russia saying, I need to get into Amanda Fennell's, coffee machine. They may be now after this podcast, but they aren't before. And so what they're doing is commodity. It's just a large sweep. It's like that Spaceballs comb the desert, like just go for it. And that's what's happening, is that there's so many devices out there and they're getting attacked and people are grabbing information and then they're doing what they do best. They're reusing passwords. They're getting into different stuff. And then that's where the real money comes in. So I guess that answers the question in a long way. There's a lot of places, a lot of stuff.
And I could wonder, like, also the other effect of consumerism on this is we're always looking for the cheapest one. And that's going to me, always result in the one that's going to be the least maintained, that's never going to have a firmware update. If there's some flaw, it's never going to get fixed.
Oh, man, you're hitting all of the great security problems, right? So, like, the first thing is the Costco dynamic, right? Everyone who goes to Costco, like, great, they got security cameras here. I'm just going to get this 5-pack of security cameras. And you're right, it's probably a bundle of some type or a smart hub of some type, things like that. And I have noticed, by the way, Costco doesn't sell any of the Apple Home Pods, which was a little disconcerting. They just have Google Home and Alexa. Also Target, same problem. Like, what's going on there? People need to be a little bit more friendly to my Apple. But yeah, they get these devices, they go for the cheapest. And then you're right. The number one security problem is, keeping things up to date. Everyone's always like, there's this huge breach. And the really big, simple answer is, well, are you up to date? Are you patched? If you are, you don't have to worry. But guess how many typical consumers are doing that? Very few. 47% of devices that are in security cameras and home networks are vulnerable. That is painful. That's almost half.
Well, and then there's an additional problem with that. I have security cameras, and I did some research, and okay, this is what I'm going to get, and I bought it through Amazon. I can admit that, and I got it and played around. Okay, it does great, and I try to be really good about my firmware updates. And so I got a firmware update for it, and it bricked the camera.
But the microcontrollers, right? Like, that's the problem, is that the microcontrollers are those 50-cent, $5 chip that's installed, and it's just cheap. Yeah, it is a problem.
And so it bricked, and I contacted the manufacturer, and they said, well, that camera, that's not a US version of the camera. That's the camera for Central and South America. And I'm like, oh, gray market stuff on Amazon, like...
No, that's true.
So even if you are diligent about your firmware updates, there's sometimes, even if you've bought something that was destined for another market, all of a sudden firmware updates. Now, I think it's crappy of manufacturers to do things that way, but like, even if you're diligent, it can go sideways.
But great security. Let's walk this through. Okay, you bought this camera. You tried to be a good steward of security to like update this and everything. Great idea. The question is that when it connects to your network, whenever it is working, so it connects to a network, then you have the problem that so many people just have their default router passwords. So that takes me less than 60 seconds to Google which one I want to hack through. And it's really simple. I was actually this is so sad. I feel bad because I feel like they're going to listen to this and hear this, but I was at a neighbor's and I was feeding the cat and I decided to go in their hot tub. And I was like, hey, I'm going to go in your hot tub. This looks great. I said, what's the Bluetooth pairing password, to connect to the sound system or whatever, because I love music. And they were like, we just set it up and we've never been able to figure that out. And like literally 30 seconds later, I was like, oh, it's this, that. And they were like, what? And I was like, uh-huh. And they were like, how did you find this? And I was like, I was only being polite by asking. Anyone who works in security, we can absolutely find this information by Googling for 60 seconds. So yeah, you connect these things to a network, then it's visible. And now here's the fun part. Everyone has this idea of like, oh, what's the big deal? It's my Bluetooth password or whatever. These things lead to other things, right? So what does a bad person do? An adversary, a bad guy, a bad girl, etc. A bad they, I guess, if we got pronouns now. So like, if you've got this situation going on that, they're trying to get something, a thermometer in a casino lobby aquarium was hacked, and they accessed the network and extracted all of the casino's high roller database with the sensitive details from this. A thermometer in an aquarium, people. Like, these things lead to other information. So when you have something connected to your network and you choose to not keep it up to date, which you did, and you choose to connect it to a network that has default passwords and is not being patched, and you're not doing good security of prevent, detect, respond, monitoring, detection, so on, like it's just a downward spiral at that point.
Yeah, that's crazy. But it's also the same amount of issues with, I assume, routers
Mm.
and potentially modems. Is like, okay, you might update your, if we're lucky, let's dream that people are actually being appropriate and updating
What a
their
beautiful dream. This is awesome.
their IP camera.
Yeah.
Like,
Updating this firmware is a thing, but yes, let's say that configuring the router. So we did this big initiative when COVID happened at our company. Was we realized that my risk profile changed. People weren't coming into the office anymore, and now all of a sudden I had to trust people in their home network. Holy Hannah and a handbasket. That sucks. I don't trust people in their home network. So then we did a huge education push for how to make yourself safe at home
mhm.
for you and your family, because a lot of people had kids that had Zooms and the Zoom bombing thing took place and so on. So we really did a big push for education about this. But it was about configuring that home router, turn off inbound network for everything except the services that run in the house. Do you even know what's connected? It's the number one thing when you start is like, what am I supposed to be protecting, right? You need to know what's connected, what's going on in your house. You mentioned people have like somewhere between like 40 to 60 devices at any given time. Well, two parts to that. Number one, I doubt everyone on this podcast listening knows that. And if they go and look in their router right now and look at the connections, they're going to be like, oh my God, why is Joe's Kowalski's phone hooked up to my network and so on? You have no idea how easy it is to get there. So really turning off, changing that default passwords, turning off that inbound network traffic, and taking a look pretty often, making sure you're not running web servers on 80 and 443. It shouldn't have any external traffic. These are some default things that you just have to update, right?
Yep. So what do you think are some of the devices that people forget are internet connected, or kind of like it just in their mind? Well, it's not really an internet connected device, but it is.
Oh gosh, like LED lights. Like, oh, that is one, like the light bulb thing has been driving me crazy. I don't have these, by the way. They scare me because it just looks like, and I think we were talking, I don't even know if we've said this here, but like the with great power comes great responsibility. First of all, who can't quote Spider-Man, right? You have to put this out there. But this dynamic of like, yes, I'm going to have light and I'm going to be able to turn it off because my kid forgets to turn his light off at night or something. But the capability of therefore then allowing someone to figure out how to get into my network and do lateral movement just because I wanted the ease of access for a light bulb, that was one that really throws me off. Everyone, I think, is scared of their baby monitors. I think
Yeah.
that one's made it out, right? Like, I think people know. But I think
And it's because it's so, but we still keep hearing of baby monitor breaches like left and right.
it's so scary. It's our most protected thing, and we don't protect it well, right?
But I think that's at least why people are concerned about the baby monitor, because they see that as like, that is the embodiment of vulnerability in that crib over there. And so they can at least visualize what the risk is. But when you're talking your LED, smart light, what's the risk of a smart light?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think people realize it, but that goes back to that same idea of like, once you get in, there's two main things you want to do. First, you elevate your privileges. And the second one is you start to poke around. And third, you try to take something, right? So you got to elevate, lateral, exfiltrate. These are the things that we want to accomplish when we're doing badness. And I don't think people realize the connection of it. I think one thing that is a weird one that people may not realize is like when guests come over and you share that password in some capacity, even if you put it in the device for them or so on, did you take their access back? Because when you didn't and they left, you've just given somebody the walking orders for how to get into your network. And you got to trust their security then, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have a few wireless technology devices where I've had to give a vendor permission, and I'm in the process of like, I'm calling them back to have them hardwire everything, because it's like, no, I don't know that your installer is not going to drive up next to my house, or
No, I know.
heaven forbid I need to change my Wi-Fi name. I don't want to have to
Oh,
jump through the hoops of like, how do I reset this, 20-year-old piece of hardware that has a Wi-Fi connection?
well, this is True. But this is one of those things that I would say is like the big hit home for people who have IoT and you're not sure what to do and so on. The first thing, like you got to make sure you reset your defaults. Don't make it so easy for people. Number two, know what's connected, right?
Yep.
But then the next one is, and I'm a huge fan of this, segregating the home network because I absolutely have separate networks. First of all, my kids are, come on, that is like a walking risk right there at all times. Minecraft and Roblox, I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm going to trust their security all the time. I mean, the great PlayStation hack from our era, right? So these are the things you got to concern yourself about that I don't know. I mean, I sure hope my children know good security, but that doesn't mean I trust my 10-year-old or my 8-year-old. So you got to segregate your network into those different pieces and making sure that you do that. And one of those would be guest access. I don't mean to make my house like I'm a corporate headquarters,
Yeah.
but legit, I have a guest separated network.
That I admit I do, but because of COVID, no one's used it.
Yes, I know. It's been wonderful, but I can't look, I live in New Orleans. People are starting trying to knock down the door. They don't care. They're Delta, like, no, they don't care. How about just Mardi Gras, coming in?
Exactly. Clarify for the audience what the heck a segregated network is.
Okay, so when you have any signal of network, the simplest way I would say this is like you turn on your router, and right now, a lot of times you can see that they've also started to do like the 5G. So you have a couple different operating abilities there if you want faster, networking and so on. But if you take that, there are ways to put pieces of your network and say, this is a separate VLAN, this is a different IP subset. And it can sound really complex to do all of those things, but I would guarantee you if you actually like Google segregating home network, it's really simple to assign those different IP subnets. Moving your DHCP block from your home router, which is currently like 172, whatever, it's like really simple.
Yep.
And making that something that's not so obvious. But this separation of your network and kind of blocking that up into pieces, and I would say also doing this in a way that makes sense. So I actually have one. Oh my gosh, here we go. This is good, great reconnaissance right now for anybody. But so I have one
But by
that
the
is for
time
all
this
of.
changes, you will have replaced it with
I
something
will have
different.
replaced it all. Yes. And everything will be changed. But so one of them is for entertainment type things. So TVs, any of the music devices and so on that there are. That is in one. So it's an entertainment function. There is one that is all my business, just mine, because my husband also does stuff at work. And so his is separate. But I have one that's just my business, which is protecting my company. That's what I care a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have one for guests. And then I have one that is for my kids because, man, is that full of just absolute trash. So I've got these all four things separated, very much, like the way I like to have my life, nice and orderly. But then I like to do a little Wireshark on that because this one, just download yourself Wireshark if you don't already play around with it and just look at the wired and wireless networks that you see are talking, what they're saying, to whom, and stop things that you don't like. A lot of routers are actually already defaulted that you can do all of that just by logging into your router and getting in there. And if you don't know how to log into your router, I guarantee you I could tell you in about 60 seconds how to get in there. But yeah, you just separate your networks into these different areas and that IP space that you have.
Do most residential kind of low-end routers now support segregation?
I actually don't know if low-end residential routers do that. What a fascinating question, because I hate to say I absolutely invested in something really expensive because I was really scared. I actually don't know, but I do think
I
now
think
that I'm thinking
most of
about
them
it,
at
yeah,
least have like a
yeah.
guest network and a non-guest network. I'm
I think
99%
there's
confident
a
of that, but
yeah.
I
I know
I
for
haven't I
sure they
haven't I
allow
haven't
you
bought
to
a D-Link
monitor.
router in like 20 years, so I don't know.
Oh,
But
no, it's a very good question, but I do know that the last time I had to play around and look at one for someone's house, I did see on their main login page there was a segmentation. So I would say yes. I'm going to go on the limb. And it's been 20 years since you were doing. Yes, I say we're right. We're going to say yes.
but I'm sure there are people listening that have a router that is probably 20 years old.
Yes. And is that
That
firmware updated? And is it patched? These are all great questions, right?
No, it's not updated. It's not been patched if it's 20 years old. And I think
Yeah.
that's the thing that,
Would it even matter if it was at this point? Yeah.
and it's probably not even supported anymore. Most of these types of residential, very low end products, they're probably supported for 2 or 3 years, and then it's gone. It's like the company doesn't even think about it anymore. They don't provide any support.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is normally legacy that hangs out when people have the same thing set up for a long time that they don't realize how much they're giving away is the identifying information. So I think that, yes, people might have routers that they've had for a long time and maybe they need to patch them or update them or change the default password. But I think I'd add on there, this made me think of it because you said D-Link and we have someone on our team in IT's name who's Daniel Link. So that's his like picture in Zoom as like a D-Link. But it did make me think about it that like the wireless SSID, people often will put like apartment numbers.
Hmm.
I don't know who set up your internet, but somewhere along the way, they have all been taught to name it the most horrible thing, which is like your address. And you're like, this is just, then you see people on the other end of the spectrum, which are just like mean and they say mean things. I was in an airplane and I was traveling with at the time our CEO of a company. And I remember I was like having a hard time with getting a signal somewhere. So I was like, oh, I'm just going to take a look and see what's out there. And then I looked and I was like, hey, why is your phone named your name? Like your full name. And he was like, huh? And I was like, dude, if I wanted to hack you, this would be like step one to find you. I was like, this is just horrible. But I would just say this identifying information is another one that while people don't update the hardware, the firmware, they don't get their things patched, they also leave that right out there. And again, it's that thing, that theory of like, who cares about it?
Yeah.
Who cares if I get hacked, right? Well, you will, because it's not just you, it's the other people in your family and your loved ones. And it could be that they're actually trying to exploit your mom who just retired and she is a great person to steal the social security benefits from and so on.
Yeah.
And so when that hack happens and you realize that you're the vector, it's painful and you don't want to be that. So I think that's one of the far reaching ones.
And I would also think you probably don't want to identify the manufacturer of your wireless router because a lot of times you see like we're picking on D-Link today. It's
Mhm.
D-Link 85312. Okay, well I now know I'm going to limit my attacks to just D-Link products.
Okay, well now I'm going to look around. Like I'm going to just press because I want to see what like but yes. So here's another one by the way that I see that comes up and people don't realize is an Internet of Things thing that they have to worry about. Your Directv. If you have Directv, it is absolutely a signal that can be hacked. And again, I think people think like, what does it matter if they hack my Directv? Well, walk it out. It's my favorite thing to do. Walk it out. They then know what you like to watch. They then know how to send you a targeted spear phishing email that says, Amanda, I know you watch Game of Thrones every night, and you're obsessed with it. So, hey, so-and-so from Game of Thrones is actually going to be in town and here are free tickets to have dinner with them. Like targeted spear phishing that can take place. And it would be so targeted, you would never think that this is some commodity thing or something. So it's the little information that gets out there that people don't realize. And yes, it's populate. Oh, printers. Yes, I love this. I
Yeah.
love this network around here because I can see all these different people and what they're doing. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people have printers that will. I could drive by the neighborhood and print something out on their printer.
Oh, and also the spool file. I mean, this has been dramatic lately
Yeah.
anyway, but I will say in forensics, it was always my favorite thing to pull that file to see the last things that they had printed or the most common things printed and so on. Man, there was one investigation I was on one time when it was actually directions on where to bury a body. I'm not even
Oh my
kidding.
goodness.
That it was in the printer file that you were like, you are kidding me that you literally printed this out in Google Maps kind of thing. It was actually back before Google Maps. But yes, it was just, yeah, you can find out a lot.
But that reminds me, like, I don't know if this is the case now, but it probably still is. There was a number of years ago, and I don't want to date myself by how many years ago it was. There was this big investigation on companies that were buying used printers, like industrial printers, really, really, like way over market value. And like people are like, why is this incredible used market for industrial photocopiers? Well, it's because they had cameras that not cameras, they had hard drives in them,
Yeah.
and so they were buying photocopiers from police stations, lawyers'
Oh,
offices, and like the companies weren't thinking, oh well, all these legal documents that we've photocopied are on a hard drive in the middle of the copy machine.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
It's like we don't even know what collects data, which is almost the scarier thing. Is like, yeah, everyone can be like the concept of like my phone is this, walking, talking liability.
Yes. Well, the
But you don't
things that
think
can
about
hold
that
this,
your copier could be
be
revealing stuff
hacked.
about you.
Well, there's an entire area between if you make the jump into medical devices.
Hmm.
This became huge in the last few years, and they even found like the FDA had confirmed that like at St. Jude's that they had implantable cardiac devices that could be easily hacked, and that they were able to remotely access and control Medtronic insulin pumps. Right? This is, I mean, you think at the time, okay, who cares? Number one, why would you hack that, and who cares? Well, first of all, it's not always commodity.
Hmm.
There could be other reasons for it. There could be something that's just very targeted for whatever reason. Maybe people don't like vets and they're going after people in the Veterans Affairs and those hospitals and so on. And activating someone's insulin or a cardiac device, done. You're done. So the jump that number one, people don't know the power of the devices that they have and what information they're gathering. And number two, they walk around feeling like, oh, it doesn't matter. It wouldn't happen to me. And it doesn't matter if it did. It does.
Yeah, that's crazy. So I'm trying to think of like, so I know like even like DSLR cameras now could be like internet connected. They can jump on your Wi-Fi so you can send yourself photos. Uh,
Mhm.
Before we started recording, we were talking about alarm systems. And while
Mhm.
I wasn't specifically talking, I was talking about my wife and I had walked around the neighborhood and noticed that this is more of a fishing thing, but like everybody who has an alarm system has a sign on the front door that says, "Hey, we're using
Protected.
ADT." Great. Now I know what alarm company you're using, and now if I'm, spearfishing trying to get into your house,
Hmm.
I know who you are already because that's why I'm at your house. Now I know you use ADT, uh,
Well, so I'm
and you're
gonna,
now revealing even more
yeah,
information about yourself.
I'm gonna put myself out there as the okay. So I think everyone's gonna have like you put people in these shoe boxes in life of like, oh, okay, crazy security person, et cetera. Okay, I have two alarm systems, so let's just get this out there now. Okay, I have two. And it's because I don't trust just one. I like to compare data between the two and so on. And I like to do, I like to do
Redundancy.
use, I like redundancy. I like user entity behavior analytics to try to figure out what is that kid's window doing open at 2 o'clock in the morning. So the first thing I'd say, from my experience from both of them, uh, one of them has definitely learned the power of what they have, and that yes, a lot of people are going to have that targeted information to try to get in. And so they've definitely rolled out all of those two-factor and multi-factor authentications and validation verification before they'll let you log into something. So that part's great. And I would say that part's awesome. The other company, to remain nameless, has not rolled it out as strongly. It's opted in. And I would say that that's one thing to look for when you have these. First of all, yes, agree. If you're going to have a sign in the front, don't use it from the actual company you use. You should definitely have like I think it's like the red herring. That's like the thing that throws people off, you know?
Exchange signs with your neighbors.
Yes. It's a great idea. It's an absolutely fantastic idea to do that. And then the second one is making sure you've got some kind of a verification, two-factor authentication that's validating you whenever you do log into anything. The other one, which I find very concerning, is that you can often, and the rings are very prolific and a lot of people use them and stuff for many devices. A lot of that information does get uploaded to the cloud.
Yep.
And that's also the question of like, how is that secure? You have to make sure that there's security there. There's a lot of trust that goes on whenever you trust somebody's cloud. And so I think that's one of those things I would put out there. So yes, I think it's a great observation. We hope that people walk away from this listening and change their signs.
Well, and when you're talking about the doorbells, I forget who Amazon's brand is. Is that Ring? Is
I
Amazon doing
don't.
Ring? I don't know.
They convert, so Alexa can work with it. Yes.
So whatever Amazon's, I forget whether that's not necessary. It must have been. I think Amazon bought Ring. That Amazon rolled out this. We're going to extend. We're going to create this product called Sidewalk,
Mm-hmm.
where we are going to basically allow other devices to get on your network
Hmm.
through our doorbells.
See,
And
this is how it
well,
starts.
it sound like the marketing was like that way. If other people's doorbells, their internet connections go down, they can keep the doorbells up and running
It's
and
not
things like.
crowdsourced, man.
But
It's not
but it's
crowdsourced.
exactly
Yeah.
what they're doing. They were crowdsourcing internet connectivity, and
Yeah.
if I hope I don't, it was, I don't believe it was necessarily opt in. I think it was actually opt out, that they
Mm.
automatically rolled out this feature that you had to go turn off. Otherwise, other Amazon devices could use your Wi-Fi, with their own little ad hoc security, but it was like,
Well,
oh, wait. So you're going to decide that you're going to let other people on my network to
yeah.
do stuff without my permission because of a firmware update?
Well, I think this goes back to one of those fundamental points of like, number one, know what's going on,
Yeah.
right? Identification, know what's going on. And number two, monitoring the ongoing connections. And that can be done easily by looking at your router and saying, well, what the hell is this going on over here? But I think that's where you don't always know what you have signed up for. And in this day and age, it's like, what was in a South Park episode? The Apple agreement that people were signing and you were signing your life away. Because the Apple agreement at this point for iTunes was like 72 pages. No one knows what we're signing anymore and what you're agreeing to. So we just skip to the end, check mark,
Yep.
because we want to get to whatever it is that we want. So I would say that to counteract that, ongoing monitoring and detection needs to be done in your home network.
So how do you do ongoing monitoring and detection?
Hmm.
So I know there's apps that you can get for your phone or your another wireless device that will scan your network looking for devices, and based on the MAC address, it'll tell you, hey, it's an Apple device, it's a TiVo, it's an Alexa device, and sometimes it's a you know Hong Kong
I I
HSBC widget. You have no idea what it is.
I feel like I'm every cliche you're saying. I do have a device that does that. So you're right. I do. So with all things, it's always, with we talk about in IT and in security, it's always people, process, and tech, right? Well, the people in the house that care about security, unfortunately, I'm the main harbinger, right? So I'm the people.
Hmm.
I'm the one that implements the process. So I'm the one who determines like who's getting on and who's getting off. It's very much like Gladiator, right? I'll decide if you're going to get on there,
Not
but
today.
not today. And I would say that I actually do deploy a device that does scan all of that. And it also sends me an alert anytime somebody joins my network. And it does tell me based on the MAC address what kind of a device it is. Some of those are a little bit wonky. I got to tell you, I had bought a couple laptops for some Minecraft love for my kids, and I was configuring them to be kid friendly and AKA couldn't do anything bad from my standpoint. And it came up that it was some random, Chinese manufacturer device, and it didn't say that it was. And I was like, what in the hell? So end result, yes, people, process, and tech. I implement that I am the people and I am the process. So the tech is what helps me the most. And it is something that has automated that and lets me know who's joining. And then I can also kill the connections. And I can also take the time and say nothing after 11, or in this case, 9 o'clock, et cetera. So I do think you should lift and shift that responsibility to some tech if you can.
And
There's a
so
lot of things you can do.
And so that's something that's run at the without disclosing the brand of the router, because we don't want to do that here. Is that
Mhm.
something that's run at the router level or between the router
It
and those
is.
devices?
So it does. I would almost say if I could give it the description in a way that's imaginative, let's just consider it like an umbrella that wraps around my router. And so it is the go between, it is the middleman that is hanging out in that area. So when something wants to connect, it's gotta talk to it. It's like the bouncer at the club.
Gotcha. Are there so for people who are okay, let me take a step back because we talked about process, we talked about people, talked about process. How often should people be checking for firmware updates on their IoT devices?
I would say that I mean, so okay. Obviously the answer is like every day, right? Okay, that's not going to happen. Okay. But I would say that if you think about it, if you implement it into some kind of thing that you do naturally, let's say that you do your bills every month, right? And you go and you open up your spreadsheet and you make sure and you pay your bills. Maybe it's every Friday or something. If you would implement it into a pattern that you have already to be scanned for updates, then it would be helpful. There are some devices out there that will automatically scan for updates and let you know an update is pending. Do you want to do this now and reset and so on? That's great. If you have that option to do automatic updates, I would opt in for that. Unfortunately, with some phones, it can be a draw on the battery, but
Yep.
I would say like otherwise, opt in if you can. But I would say at the minimum, I would say you've got to do this monthly. I would at the minimum monthly. Quarterly is okay. At least you're doing something. Weekly would be great. But the updates don't really come out as often as you would think. But there is patching and so on that does need to happen. But I'd say that's a great way. Just implement it into one of your normal routines that you already know that you do.
I like that. That makes sense. I think that's accessible. It's not like I need to
Mhm.
check every single
Every
automated light
day.
switch every day for an update. That would be,
Yeah.
yeah. You spend half my day
Well, also
updating stuff.
just scanning your network, like getting a scanner, like a free open source, you can get a scanning and you can scan your network for any vulnerabilities. This is what we do every day at work. So why wouldn't we use this for our home environment and say, and you can have fun with this. I do this with my 10-year-old. I'm like, all right, let's see if we can hack mommy's network today. Let's take a look at this. So just get a free open source, download a scanner, scan your environment and see if any high vulnerabilities pop out at you. And you'll be able to see if you've got something.
So, are there any particular open source scanners that you'd recommend?
I mean, there's none that pop to mind that I'm like, this is the number one thing that I would scan with. So I think that I've used probably like 10 different ones in my life, and they're all great. Now we have so many for work that everything is not open source. Open source always helps, but Shodan, making sure you know what's out there, those kind of things are super helpful. Worst case scenario, if you are feeling overwhelmed by the concept of doing something like a scan, you should find someone you do trust
Yeah.
and ask them to help you and work with you, because everyone knows that person who likes computers. And I would say get that person and say, hey, I'll get you a bottle of wine. Come on over on a Friday night. Let's take a look and see if I've got any vulnerabilities. I got to tell you, I've made a lot of friends that way, and not because they'll invite me over. You seem good with computers. I'm like, all right, cost you a glass of wine.
As long as it's not just come on over. Oh, hey, while you're here, would you
Yes,
mind
yes,
looking
that's my
at?
mother-in-law. That's it's totally true. By the way, while you're here, I'm like, okay, here we go.
Let's see, what have we missed anything here in this discussion about smart home IoT? To me, I think uh, the stuff that I'm afraid of is the stuff that I don't know exists, or the stuff that I didn't ever connect it, but I don't. You talked about like the smart coffee maker or the smart fridge. Those are things that I personally would. I just don't see the benefit of enabling personally, and
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the things that, like, if I had one of those devices in my house, I know I don't. The risk of those devices, if they're broadcasting their own connectivity,
Yes.
or if they're
Yeah. Well,
broadcasting.
two parts, right? So like it's first of all, like, people don't see the risk associated with it because it seems simple. I have a coffee machine and I set it up, and it's basically knows my schedule that I'm going to have coffee at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I have a second cup at whatever other time. So okay, so now we can do targeted spear phishing towards Amanda. She's a coffee junkie, not a surprise. But second thing is, it also lets people know potentially when I'm leaving the house.
Hmm.
So when your house is empty. And so it really goes back to this concept of reconnaissance. This is, I know you know all about kill chain. Like, this is like, who doesn't love kill chain, right? Let's go back 2008. Let's get into it. But reconnaissance in step one of trying to attack something, you need to know, and in the Sun Tzu Art of War, you need to know your enemy, kind of thing. Any information is helpful.
Yeah.
And that coffee machine seems so minuscule, but it does tell you whenever people aren't there, potentially, and whenever they're leaving. That refrigerator tells people when you're not there, and whenever your house is empty and vulnerable.
And that's kind of the, you know, I hear like the when you're on when you're on vacation, make sure that lights are still turning on and off on the same schedule that they turn on and off when you're actually home.
Oh, no, crazy Ivan it. You should do a different schedule. Absolutely.
Or
Yeah.
realistically, the schedule should be changed. There should be randomness in when your lights turn
Yes.
on and off,
Because people are often
whether
random.
you're
Yeah.
there or not.
Yes. And I think there's also a deterrence factor that can be bypassed as well. I think by just a little bit of a wall. It's really always in security been about from the very beginning. I had something I want to protect. I'm going to put a castle around it, and I'm going to protect these quote crown jewels, right? Which, by the way, the crown jewels are not really great protected nowadays. They're like totally accessible. But okay, so we put a castle around something I want to protect. And then I'm going to protect it more. I've got more money. I'm going to put some people in charge to protect it. Then I'm going to build a moat and a bridge and all these other things. But the one thing that you really have to do is just build it enough that you're not attractive. That's all you have to do, is not be the slowest person in the herd, right? Just build enough of a wall that you're not easily accessible. And it can be done by just updating that firmware, patching, changing the default passwords, such simple moves that you've made yourself just a little bit less accessible. And the neighbor next door, I guarantee you, hasn't done those things.
Yeah.
So they're going to be the one that gets hacked.
Oh, and then my big one: if your router admin password should not be your Wi-Fi password.
Oh my gosh.
I think
Yeah.
most people, they just kind of think, oh, I just want to remember one password for my network, and so the password that they give out to their
Yeah.
friends when they come over to use the house, to use the
Yes.
Wi-Fi, is the same password that unscrupulous person goes in and on a
Well, one,
bad
two,
day logs
three.
in. And
Yes. I mean, you got one, they're using the default password. Two, they're using the same password that they use, right? So this is a great point. And three, they're just reusing a password, period, that they use often, and they don't understand the importance of it, that it's also the password for their bank account, which again, maybe you don't have any concern about it, but they are able to overdraft you, or they are able to use your information to create a fake ID and do social security claims against you and so on. So these are things that the password reuse, which always drive me nuts. But yeah, what a great point. I don't know why people do that, but I have come across it.
or they use your or they use your account, your bank account, as an intermediary fraud. So this
Oh, how so?
So the scammers send money into, they've taken over your account and you
Okay,
don't
yeah, yeah.
know. They send money into your account and then they
Mhm.
funnel it off to somebody else. So when the police come calling, they come to you and say, "Why are you laundering money?" And you're like, "Huh?"
Actually, I saw something that was a case that I was on about a year ago, not related to my company, just putting that out there. But I did see something where it was like a nonprofit, and they found their bank account had all these transactions added in, and they were super confused. And it turned out that it was like the card company, like a PayPal kind of
Hmm.
situation, had been um, hacked. And so they'd gotten a bunch of different people's information and they were testing it. And they felt like the one fastest way to test it would be as a donation on a company that was an NGO,
The,
because nobody cares or tracks that. Like,
Again, you're accepting donations. You're not going to
of
question.
course you're going to. So nobody's going to make you do a CAPTCHA on that website when you do donation. They just want the money. So they went to a company and they did that. And so it was super sad because this company woke up one morning with like $30,000 added to their account, really excited. They were like, oh my God, we finally have been found out and people care. And no, you have to give all that money back, actually. None of those people donated it, but
Oh,
they were just testing it. So the intermediary was painful there.
oh, yeah. That's why you want to, yeah. Always keep tabs on your bank accounts,
That's right.
please.
Yes, keep an eye for any activity. And also, a lot of those banks nowadays, they've got the alerts set up. I love this one credit card that I have. I mean, they text me for anything. Is this you? Is this a duplicate? Did you mean to tip this much? Which I love that question because it makes me feel like such a good person. Like, I did mean to tip that much, yes. But I really do appreciate companies that go above and beyond with that kind of stuff to notice that the behavior is different.
And I think that's kind of where I think, in some sense, security and privacy is moving, is finding that stuff that's abnormal.
Mhm.
And
Well, secure by default, privacy by default. We all deserve to have our information private and in a secure fashion, but it does still have to be available. That's the line we walk every day.
yeah. So I guess it's like with smart home devices, we got to figure out, is the benefit worth the risk, and what can we do to mitigate the risk? The only way to get rid of the risk is don't install it, don't plug it in, don't bring it
Yeah,
into the house.
yeah.
And for some
But
people,
you can.
that's a good option.
Yes, like I said though, like I'm navigating it myself because I can't help it. How much I like to cook and I like to have my music on when I'm cooking. So I've finally given into it and capitulated. But it is one of those things that you just have to implement those basic fundamentals of prevent, detect, respond. You have to have a mitigation in place. You have to know what is normal, what is abnormal, and make sure you're monitoring that.
Perfect. I know you guys have a an interesting podcast about security. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, I do. This is like, so speaking of cooking, this is actually one of the reasons why this came about. We, often do what security teams do. We get together and during this remote time, we do a lot of happy hours remotely kind of thing. And I noticed these conversations would just go on for like 4 hours and they're hilarious. I got into an argument last week with a whole bunch of people about the way electricity works in Canada. Like this was a thing. Okay. So we get into these debates and everything, and I find them so fun that we finally decided to do a podcast where we pulled all of it together, where people who are passionate about something unrelated to security and outside of work, we bring it in to security. So we have an external person who's an authority on something like archaeology, neurosurgery. We actually just did basketball 2 weeks ago and astrology the week before. So like kind of some crazy concepts. But we get them on the call with somebody or a podcast with somebody who's also an expert inside with security or HR or something. And we put the two together. We mixed it up just like a sandbox and say like, okay, well, what do we create with this? And it is shocking how many of these things actually have great overlays. But it is the Security Sandbox. It's a podcast that we release every month, a new episode. And it's pretty exciting.
That's awesome. And if people want to find you online, where can they find you and your company?
Yeah, relativity.com, not Einstein, which I think everyone thinks that's what Relativity is, but nope. So relativity.com. And if you go on there, you will see we have, you just search for Amanda Fennell or Security Podcast or any of that stuff, you'll find it. And we are on anywhere that you get your podcasts.
Awesome. Amanda, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Well, it was easy to be here. So thank you for having me.
That's so kind. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Pray podcast. If you found something this episode helpful, please leave a review at easypray.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Amanda Fennell can be found at easypray.com/83.